So art and depression have a sustained link. The idea of the tortured artist has become as cliche as a damsel in distress. In fact, Vincent van Gogh once wrote, "How much sadness is there in life? Nevertheless, one must not become melancholy. One must seek the distraction in other things. And the right is to work." Aristotle wrote, "There is no great genius without a mixture of madness." And why is it that all those who have become eminent in philosophy, politics, poetry, and the art are clearly abatrillus temperament, and some of them to such an extent be affected by diseases caused by black bile? So this begs us curious to wonder, are these two really linked? Does having a mental illness make you more creative? And why might this go unspoken? Today we're asking the question, why do artists get depressed? This is the Oxymoron Podcast. I'm your host, Eos. I'm joined by Casanova.
Hello.
And a special guest, Hexadecibal.
Yo.
Before we get into this, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Yeah, so I've been DJing since 2003. Luckily enough, I've been able to travel quite extensively. We started our channel, Extra Sessions Media, when my wife decided she wanted to DJ. So we decided to teach people how to DJ, both in English and in Korean, to kind of bridge some of those gaps that we see. There's a big need for it, but at the same time, everybody's getting kind of pulled into these like scam DJ Academy type things. So we wanted to create something that's absolutely free to help people grow as an artist.
Awesome. There'll be a link down below to Extra Sessions Media. Please, if you're interested at all in DJing or wanting to be a DJ or anything that comes along the lines of that, please go check it out. So, why do you think artists get depressed?
I think it comes down to a few different things. With musicians, one of those things being them always being on the road and away from family and friends and traveling so much. For many people this may seem fun, but to do it for for a long extent of time, and if you're away from family and friends, I could see to where this would have negative psychological effects. And also, when it comes to the lifestyle with drug use and other things of that sort, I believe that can help contribute to the said depression.
So for me, I think the reason artists are currently getting depressed is a combination of things as well. My list does differ slightly from you. I think it's the state of the arts industry. Everything is very cookie cutter nowadays. Everybody does the same thing. No matter what type of music you're doing or if you're acting, everybody's been kind of dialed into these little boxes, and if they stray too far outside of the norm, it kind of gets bashed, which also leads everybody to this crazy state of perfectionism. It definitely cripples that. You take that plus, if you're a touring DJ or anything for that matter, that travel schedule is pretty brutal. It takes a lot on you physically as well as mentally. So when you're already having a hard enough time trying to keep up with what's going on in your industry, in the art industry, yeah, it definitely adds up quickly. And of course, drug abuse, alcohol abuse definitely are contributing factors, along with if somebody has a mental illness. And it just creates this big cascade and a black wall for depression.
Do you think there is a correlation between the part of your brain that is responsible for creativity and the part that is associated with mental illness?
I personally don't think that there is a correlation. The only way I can possibly see a correlation would be, for instance, with actors. They have to pretend to have these feelings that they otherwise don't have for a role. However, for most artists, whether you be a painter or, a music producer or a musical act of any kind, I just don't see that fakeness to it. So I don't see the correlation between somebody's mental illnesses with their creative side, because their emotions are in check with the things that they're creating.
Well, with this, I've looked into this, and are you familiar with Akinola and Mendez?
No, I'm not familiar with their work.
What they did was they took a lot of artists and they hooked them up to several machines and scanned their brains and to see if there was a possible correlation between certain parts of their brains and stuff. And they found that the artists that were depressed all had the same part of their brains seemed to be the most intensely skewed. By that meaning, like, it was used way more often than any other part of their brain. And it was a link between all of them that were depressed, but it was not found in those that weren't, or even general people for most part, or people that were even depressed. I'll leave a link down to this below so you can check it out for yourself.
Have you ever felt this effect on you?
Luckily for me, I haven't felt this kind of an effect on myself personally. However, I have seen people have similar experiences.
Yeah, for me personally, being an artist, particularly when it comes to songwriting, I always found that I couldn't write songs about like love. I don't know why I couldn't. I tried. Even if I was in love at the moment, I just couldn't. all the songs, for the most part, that I've written that had lyrics to them all tended to be around like darkness or depression to some extent. I am not clinically depressed, so I don't think this has affected me, but I have found that I do tend to be a type of person that does gravitate towards writing those type of things. And I know of several artists that are like this. Some people just write, when they write love songs. When they write this. And those tend to show a little bit into what just goes on in their mind subconsciously. And for me, I tend to write songs that are about depression.
Well, I have a question, you guys. Do you believe that perhaps the excessive alcohol and drug abuse within the artistic community is triggering the overall depression rate?
I would say it most definitely does. And like you touched on earlier, with people that already have some sort of mental like illness or something of that sort, it affects them even more. So I would say, yeah, it has a great effect on them and definitely can contribute to the depression that the artist feels.
I'd like to backpedal a little bit from that. I'm not saying that you're wrong or that I disagree, but I'd like to backpedal from that idea for a second. I think that having alcoholism and the other illnesses are a product of the depression and the product of them being in that state of mind or having that disease. I don't think it's logarithmic. I don't think if you're depressed and then you become an alcoholic that you're worse off. Typically, I think one is a sign of the other, and I do think they can be separate, but I don't think that immediately they are, as you said, or might say, entwined with each other, making one more significant than the other, building on top of each other. Do you think that this type of a thing is caused by an inspiration dilemma?
You know, I definitely kind of do think that the depression is caused by an inspirational dilemma. When I was talking earlier, I had mentioned that perfectionist element. With that in mind, if everybody's doing something very cookie cutter, again, I had mentioned that earlier as well, it's hard to break away from the norm. So when you don't have a lot of inspiration and uniqueness to work off of, I could definitely see it becoming almost like a weight on your chest because everything has to sound similar in order for it to gain exposure.
What I originally meant by this term, which I love the way you took that term, was that many people and artists find that they have to feel like they're inspired, and to become inspired they might do something such as drink alcohol or do drugs.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
Like the Beatles were very, very well known for this. They wouldn't write till they got blitzed out of their mind. And that dilemma of they have to be inspired to write this hit kind of numbed their emotions and made them feel like it's not good enough. And that thought of it's always not good enough eventually led, or at least helped in some sort of way, to their depression or just their anxiety or whatever mental illness they had occurred. What do you think, Casanova?
I would say I definitely agree with that statement. I think them trying to experiment with different things to help their writing abilities, and if they already have such a thing going on, that it would most definitely add to their situation in a negative manner.
Yeah. Do you think that forcing rather than focusing emotions causes artists to go numb? What I mean by this is that forcing yourself to become inspired, do you think that hurts the art rather than if you were to just be inspired and write a song?
I think the forcing of emotion is causing them to go numb. When you force a fake feeling, eventually that feeling's meaning deteriorates over time. You do it enough times over so long a period of a career, eventually emotions ring shallow because you force the extreme version of those emotions for so long that just the normal feeling of the emotion is unnatural.
Yeah, I agree. I believe you definitely lose a feel for what the real emotion is when you force an emotion.
I have a follow-up to that. Do you think that this makes the art worse or better?
I think it makes it worse because then it becomes by the numbers, so to speak. If everybody is forcing themselves to reach this emotional level constantly, whether that particular height of emotion is necessary for that particular spot, whether it be acting or music, it ends up being completely disconnected from real emotions, thus watered down.
Because when I thought of this question, I was thinking that if you force an emotion, you get some kind of new emotion. It's like if a artist, like a painting artist, mixes two colors together, they don't get either one of the colors, but they get a new color, which makes a new art, or essentially a new color to paint with. Makes an art different, and that it might not be subjectively worse. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, I think quite the opposite. While it is true for painters and graphic designers, when you start combining things, it does create something new. I think when you're trying to force something emotional, whether it be through music, speech, or acting, you end up creating something not believable, something that is disconnected. And I think eventually the audience will pick up on that. Do you guys think that numbness or depression are linked to the concept of being alone on stage?
I think it has a lot to do with it. I think it has significantly a lot to do with it. I feel like when artists, many of them put on a facade to get over, early on a stage anxiety, that they try to get themselves away from the fact that they are on stage to become more comfortable. And that, well, this can be helpful and has been helpful for many, that exaggerating this facade can impact them negatively, and I think it possibly could cause some kind of mental illness.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you look at an artist like Jim Morrison, when he first started doing his shows, he would not face the crowd due to a fear of the crowd, and he's actually an artist who ended up dying, I believe, at the age of 27, and he seemed to be a fairly depressed individual at times. So I would say definitely along those lines for sure. Do you think mental issues make people more creative?
I feel with music producers as well as people who do visual arts, whether it be painting or graphic design, it kind of does. I have quite a few friends that are probably the most talented painters I have ever met in my entire life that are bipolar. Their art is just absolutely amazing. And then on the music production side, I mean, let's be realistic, you have to be a little crazy to go on stage by yourself in front of, hundreds or thousands of people. I mean, that just kind of goes with the territory. And then you have to create something more or less on the fly each time you step on stage. So I think that I guess emotional instability that people have from certain mental illnesses could potentially make them more creative in certain fields.
Yeah, I think that this link of mental illness the science isn't exactly certain that they are linked yet. The current information we have suggests that, but there's so much more that needs to be done, and it's really hard for them to actually do the research because of ethics.
Well, it's actually not just ethics, though. Another big part of the contributing factor is the economics of it. For instance, grants. If a department doesn't have grants to do these kind of studies, we honestly will never find out. And the question becomes, how many lives have to be lost before we realize that we need to do more for the mental illnesses as far as finding either what's triggering or associative causes.
Yeah, but I think that people that are prone to being mentally ill because they use certain parts of their brains that others don't use, it essentially gives them a leg up when it comes to thinking outside of the box. So I think that tends to make them more creative. I also think that since they have to put the facade on, like I said before, that contributes potentially to causing this.
Do you think the lack of mental issues or even memories of deep emotional pain would make an art or any medium worse than if it didn't exist?
Honestly, I don't think it does. If a person isn't doing a type of art based on the concept of pain or something designed to have you feel pain, I don't think their lack of that firsthand experience is going to be relevant. I think as long as artists stay within fields and emotions that they can personally draw real life inspiration from, I don't think it has any bearing.
It's a tough line to try to say yes or no with this. I do think having more memories and more emotional pain, or just more emotional memories in general, allows them to create more of a palette for their art. And a lot of songs aren't, at least the ones that I tend to enjoy more, aren't just happy. They aren't just sad. There's some kind of mixture. They're happy sad, or parts of the songs are like that, and it's more than just what's on the face value. It's so much deeper emotionally. It's just not one emotion. I think that's why a lot of people tend to stray away from pop songs, because they tend to be that way. But a lot of my favorite songs are so dense emotionally in so many different ways, with so many different emotions. A lot of them might be a song about love, and might be about the happiness of love, but within the context of the words and their choices they make, you can see this deep, sad person that is living a life they love living with the other person.
Well, let me ask kind of a follow-up question to that.
Go ahead.
Wouldn't somebody who's purely happy be really off base? I mean, we're talking about extremely mentally ill. I don't know a single person that has never experienced some kind of sadness that's given more depth to an emotion. Basically, what I'm asking here is, what we might think is a shallow field of pain to somebody else who hasn't experienced as much pain could be dramatically larger. What do you think?
I think that is a very good point. With that, I think that's why art is so subjective, and that that people like certain things more than others, and sometimes a song that is possibly too deep can affect someone in a way that they don't like it. Like there's a very famous book called A Brave New World, and it talks about a lot of subjects and topics in a very deep way, and I don't think I've ever talked to someone about the book and they've liked it because of just how deep it is, and because it talks about several taboo things that makes them uncomfortable. So I think your point with that is very good, but I like to stand on the side that all forms of art should and can be made, no matter how taboo or what way it is. If a song is truly completely 100% happy in every instance, even on the most dramatic of sides, that in itself is still a very deep from its standpoint, because you're very deep into that side of it, and that gives it a whole new color than if it was mixed, a color we've never seen in something be completely truly happy. You have anything to follow up?
No.
Many people feel that contentment is the enemy of progress. How do you think this holds up?
I absolutely agree. When you're content with anything and everything, nothing has meaning. And if nothing has meaning, how can anything be moved forward? How can anything be brought to the next logical step in its evolution? I mean, look at the evolution of music. If people were content, we wouldn't have so many vastly and wildly different genres that have become popular over the years. And sure, some fade and some evolve, but still, it's that lack of contentment that drives it.
Yeah, I watched a great video on this. I'll leave a link down to it below where he talked about this. And one of the points he made was, if you're content with something, like you said, like if you're content with your room being a mess, that your room will forever be a mess. But if you're not content with it, you will clean it up. And this sense of always trying to move forward does change the landscapes of art in general. And that often people that are content with the way their art looks don't tend to be the ones that stand out or become famous. What do you think, Casanova?
I would say in general this holds up, but when it comes to some things, if you're not content with it, but general people think it's quite good, and then maybe you alter it too much or you change too much on something, then sometimes it can actually hurt what you're working on. But in general sense, I would say it most definitely is.
Yeah, well, the follow-up to that is, I play piano, as I believe both of you know, in like a classical setting usually. And a thing with that is, it's very infamous for the idea to be, there are songs, written by people like Beethoven or Mozart or many of the other ones, Franz Liszt is a great example for this, that you can always make it better, and that you should always make it better. So, you might learn this song, well, what one person might say perfectly, but you haven't learned it. There's so much more you can go with it on and on and on before you might even want to present it. And this idea, I've known plenty of artists that have learned songs but never played them in front of me because they were never good enough. So that might also, like you said, might backfire a little bit and hurt their reach. Even if it is this great masterpiece, it's still not good enough. Give me another 5 years to work on it, then I'll present it. And it gives this intense reworking idea to it. Do you have any comments about that?
I don't have a comment about that. In fact, that does raise up, kind of my next question, so it's beautifully tied. Do you think that self-imposed need for perfection is playing a role in the level of depression and emotional instability we're seeing in the artistic community? I mean, the level of refinement we're talking about nowadays has become so fine that people have, literally gone mad trying to attain what they think is perfect.
Yes, I would actually say that's very true. I think that's definitely a big contributor to that. And I think not just in a modern sense, but people trying to do something what they think is perfect throughout, about as long as arts existed, has always kind of played a role in that. So I'd say that is, lost my train of thought. I'd say that's a very big component of that. So yeah, I would agree with what you said.
Yeah, I think it's really key that this struggle doesn't become an obsession, because that, I think, is a big contributor to this link, or at least the suggestion of a link, is that a lot of people that are diagnosed with these type of illnesses have thoughts like this, or similar situations cause things like this to occur, and so forth and so forth. But an important thing to note about it is that it's like a forced mental illness almost, and it's kind of beautiful and scary at the same time, because you're forcing, I'll backpedal a little bit. There's a very famous, tale, is this way to put it, about, an artist. There's this, you walk up to this store, and outside the store, there's this cello player, and he's playing, he's ripping, he's the best cello player you have ever seen. And the guy turns to him and says, I would give my life to play like that. And the cello player turns and says, I did. That he gave his life to become that good. And that this self-imposed progression, or I don't really have a way to say it, but the self-imposed need to progress and always have something to be the best it can, it's a beautiful disaster in that it's self-imposed to become the best, but it still is a mental illness that, we don't really want people to be mentally ill.
That's an interesting take, and it definitely kind of runs parallel to my thought process on that. The problem is the obsession element at the end of the day. How obsessed we become with our art is going to either help us or hurt us. And what we're seeing now is long-term. A lot of our favorite artists are taking their lives after a prolonged period of time of this level of obsession. And people are literally not just sacrificing interpersonal relationships, but they're also kind of sacrificing their own connection with reality to obtain something that, while it may be genius at times, otherwise it's just mad.
Do you think that constructive pessimism, or pessimism in general, leads to a healthy lifestyle or a tragic lifestyle?
With pessimism, it's definitely kind of a balancing act. You need a little bit of pessimism just to survive in the world nowadays. However, if you're going to the extremes and you're not in comedy, I definitely can see this being something that's going to lead you down a path of tragic lifestyle. I mean, there's just so much data in reference to depression that proves that pessimism is a contributing factor of depression. They almost go hand in hand, word for word, and it's definitely a delicate balancing act. But if you're just always pessimistic, you're always going to be depressed, and we know how that turns out if you don't get help.
I would say in general that, pessimism normally leads people down towards a tragic lifestyle where they just start, I'm talking on the extreme scale, on the fairly large scale with pessimism, that when somebody only sees the bad and doesn't really recognize the good, it just leads to depression and leads them down that tragic lifestyle. So I definitely agree with that for the most part. Why do you think many artists turn to drugs and alcohol to cope with their demons?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's so many cause and effect relationships between these kind of vices and a person's personal demons. But the problem actually is more or less, it's not that the demons are being helped by the drugs and alcohol, they're actually being multiplied. In other words, if you're always feeling like, I have to be buzzing or drunk or I have to be high in order to look at myself in the mirror, you're not winning at all. You're not coping at all. You're creating almost like a false approval of yourself. And until you can actually face those demons, you're never going to succeed in that battle. And I think that that's kind of the problem, and why so many artists are turning to drugs and alcohol is because they don't realize that. Until you learn to face your problems, face your demons, and move straight forward, all you're doing is making it worse.
Yeah, I think one reason that they might turn to it is because primarily in the 80s and 70s and 60s, that at that time, and still prevalent nowadays, is that they already are in the environment where they'll be drinking a lot of alcohol and doing a lot of drugs, and that feeling leaches onto them, and that they pursue that feeling of being high or being drunk, because they're already in that environment. They're already around people that are doing it at parties and that kind of a lifestyle, that it leaches on, and once it takes hold, it doesn't let go. Why do you think that there is this idea of the starving artist?
It's very difficult to make money off of art, whether it be a visual art, audio art, or acting. There's a very small percentage of people who can earn a livable income from art. So the concept of a starving artist kind of comes from that. However, I think that if you're coming into art to become profitable, you made a terrible life choice. You should do art for the love of the art. And if you gain enough notoriety or fame, or however you want to word it, to be able to make a livable income from your art, then you should feel blessed. You have nothing to complain about. So many people would kill for that opportunity. But most people just become overly pessimistic about it. And again, now we're back here. And that creates the idea of a starving artist. That guy who's getting, minimum wage, working a job just so he can try to get famous, living in an area he can't afford to live in. And that's definitely unhealthy. What do you guys think?
I think that this idea of the starving artist is a little bit twisted, because for me personally, looking at the art industry, there are a lot of jobs in art that aren't exactly glamorous, such as being a sound technician or just being a choir director. There are many jobs, there's not the glamorous ones. And I think this idea of the starving artist is become a cliche, because that's the route that many people take in this, because for them it's not good enough to be a sound technician. It's not good enough for them to be a high school choir director. It's not good enough. It leads back into that idea that there's the progression, the constructive pessimism almost, the pessimism in general, that it's not good enough, so they have to be the one to move to that certain town, like you said. Sadly, it is that time again. We have to call the show here, but please join us back next week when we continue the conversation even further in part 2 next Friday. Please like and subscribe and tell us what your comments are on today's show. Did you agree with us? Did you disagree? And thank you for listening.